Tatum Voss slid a folder across the mahogany dining table the same way a man slides divorce papers, without looking at you. He didn't look at his wife when he did it. He just set it down, straightened his cuffs and said, "Explain that." Willa Voss, 37-year-old director of the Hargrove Community Health Initiative and wife of Tatum Voss, stood at the far end of that table and did not move. The chandelier above her cast warm light across 12 empty chairs. They were alone, but the room felt crowded with everything that had been building for 3 years. She looked at the folder. She did not touch it. Tatum Voss, 43-year-old Chief Operating Officer of Voss Meridian Capital and husband of Willa, pulled out his chair and sat down like the conversation was already over. "There are wire transfers in your name," he said, reading through the initiative's accounts, $38,000 over 4 months. "The board is aware." Willa finally moved. She walked to the table, opened the folder and read. Her face did change, not because she wasn't feeling anything, but because she had learned over 11 years of marriage to this man that the moment you show fear is the moment he decides he's won. "I didn't authorize these," she said. Tatum picked up his phone. "The signatures say otherwise." She looked at the signatures. They were close, but not close enough. She had signed her name the same way since she was 19 years old. A hard loop on the W, no tail on the finals. These signatures had a tail, a small one, but it was there. She closed the folder and looked at her husband. He was already typing something on his phone. He hadn't even waited to see what she would say. That told her everything. What Willa did not say in that moment, what she kept locked behind her teeth, was that she had been tracking irregularities in Voss Meridian Capital's financials for 7 weeks. Not because she'd gone looking, because a payment meant for the initiative had bounced back to her with a memo line attached. Her CO directive, redirect to Orvan LLC. She had never heard of Orvan LLC, so she'd looked it up, and then she couldn't stop looking. She didn't say any of that. She picked up the folder, tucked it under her arm and said, "I'll need a copy of the originals." Tatum finally looked up from his phone. "The board meets Thursday." "I know," Willa said. "I'll be there." She walked out of the dining room. She walked up the stairs. She sat on the edge of their bed in the dark for a long time, folder in her lap, and she thought about the day 11 years ago when Tatum had come home holding a term sheet for his first real fund. $200,000 in seed capital, almost all of it from her grandfather's silent investment, routed discreetly because her grandfather had believed in her judgment and in keeping family money out of the spotlight. Tatum had never known where that money came from. He'd thought it was a small business lender. She had let him think that because her grandfather had asked her to, and because it hadn't seemed like it mattered. That was before she understood the kind of man Tatum was becoming. Now Voss Meridian Capital managed $4.3 billion in assets. And somewhere in those assets was a thread that, if you pulled it, would lead back to a company called Orvan LLC and a woman named Darcy Prell. Willa had never met Darcy Prell in person, but she had found her name on 6 internal memos. She had found her signature on a vendor contract renewal that Tatum had approved without going through procurement. She had found her photograph, eventually on a company retreat itinerary. 3rd row, standing next to Tatum, her hand resting on his forearm, in the easy habitual way of someone who does not think twice about touching a man in public. Darcy Prell, 29-year-old Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships at Voss Meridian Capital, had been with the firm for 2 years. Willa had done the math. She did not cry that night. She did not call anyone. She lay on her side of the bed and listened to Tatum come upstairs an hour later, undress in the dark, and get in next to her without a word. She waited until his breathing slowed. Then she got up, went to her home office, and kept working. The board meeting on Thursday was at the Voss Meridian offices on the 42nd floor of a building downtown that Tatum had insisted on, because the view, he said, made investors feel like their money was going somewhere. Willa had attended every annual meeting since the firm's founding. She sat in the back row. No one questioned her presence. The board considered her a formality, the founder's loyal wife who showed up to smile and be thanked by name. She let them believe that. The first 40 minutes of the meeting were routine. Fund performance, portfolio updates, Q3 projections. Willa sat with a legal pad in her lap and wrote nothing. She already knew the numbers. What she was watching was Tatum's face when the compliance officer, a careful man named Hewson Pratt, presented the quarterly audit summary. There was a line item under operational expenditures, vendor services, Orvan LLC, listed as a technology infrastructure contractor, $1.2 million over 18 months. Hewson moved past it without comment. Tatum's jaw did not move, not even slightly. That was the tell. A man who had nothing to hide would have been bored during that line item. Tatum had been still in the specific controlled way of someone performing stillness. Willa raised her hand. There was a small silence. Board members turned to look at her. I have a question about the Orvin LLC line item, she said. Could you pull up their vendor registration and proof of service delivery? Hewson blinked. That's not typically reviewed in the board session. I understand, Willa said pleasantly. I'm asking anyway. Tatum cut in. Willa. His voice had a particular temperature, not hot, not cold, the exact degree of controlled warmth that told her she's supposed to back down. She did not back down. The board has a fiduciary responsibility to verify contractor relationships, she said. I'd like to see the registration, for the record. What followed was 22 minutes of procedural difficulty. Hewson pulled the vendor file. The registration for Orvin LLC was dated 16 months ago. The registered agent was a law firm in Delaware. The listed business address was a mailbox suite in Scottsdale. Under services provided, the description read, consulting and digital infrastructure support. There were no deliverables documented, no project milestones, no signed statements of work. $1.2 million to a shell. The board members were quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when people in expensive suits suddenly realize they have been very comfortable not asking questions. Tatum stood up. He straightened his jacket with both hands, a gesture Willa recognized as the one he used when he needed a moment to calculate. These concerns were reviewed by outside counsel last quarter, he said. I can have the documentation sent to each of you by end of week. That would be helpful, said Arlene Dutton, 61-year-old chair of the investment committee, in a tone that said it would be more than helpful. It would be required. The meeting ended without resolution, which was itself a kind of resolution. Willa knew what she had done. She had put a thread on the table in front of the people who signed the checks. The thread would not disappear. In the elevator going down, Tatum stood next to her and did not speak until the doors opened on the lobby. Then he said quietly, "That was a mistake." "The Orvin question?" Willa asked. "What do you think you're doing?" She looked at him. "I think I'm doing my job." She walked out through the revolving glass door first. He did not follow immediately. She heard the door spin twice after her before she reached the curb. That evening, Willa received a call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. The man on the other end introduced himself as Lyndon Cross, 54-year-old senior partner at Ashwell & Cross, a firm she had never heard of. He said he had been retained by the estate of her grandfather, Orland Creswick, and that there were matters related to the estate requiring her urgent attention. Her grandfather had been dead for 8 years. She had assumed his estate was long settled. "There are instruments that only become active upon certain conditions," Lyndon said carefully. "Your grandfather was very specific. We've been monitoring the situation. We believe the conditions have been met." She sat down on the bottom step of the staircase, phone pressed to her ear, and asked what conditions. What Lyndon Cross told her over the next 40 minutes rearranged everything Willa thought she understood about her life. Her grandfather, Orland Creswick, had not simply made a quiet investment in Tatum's early fund out of family affection. Orland Creswick had been the sole founding limited partner of Voss Meridian Capital, holding a 49% equity stake through a series of layered trusts, all managed by Ashwell & Cross and all deliberately invisible to Tatum, to the board, and to Willa herself, until she turned 38, which she had done 4 months ago, and until evidence emerged of financial misconduct by the managing partner, which it had. Her grandfather had written those conditions himself. He had built them into the trust with the specificity of a man who had spent decades watching what happened to family money when the wrong people got comfortable with it. Voss Meridian Capital did not belong to Tatum. Not entirely, not even mostly. The trust Willa had just inherited gave her the right to demand a full forensic audit, to suspend the managing partner pending investigation, and, if misconduct was confirmed, to trigger a restructuring clause that would transfer operational control to the limited partner's representative, to Willa. She was quiet for a long time after Lyndon finished speaking. "He never told me," she finally said. "He wanted to," Lyndon said. "He told me that. But he also said that telling you would mean telling you about Tatum, and that he couldn't do that without evidence. He hoped the conditions would never be triggered. He hoped he was wrong about the man." She put her hand over her mouth for a moment. Then she took it away. "What do we do first?" "We file the audit request," Lyndon said. "Tonight, if you're ready." She looked at the folder she had carried home from the board meeting, sitting on the hallway table. "I'm ready," she said. The next 9 days were the longest of Willa's life, and also strangely the most focused. Ashwell & Cross retained a forensic accounting team. Willa provided everything she had collected over the previous 7 weeks. The Orvin memo, the bounced payment, the vendor registration, the board minutes. The accountants found the rest. Orvin LLC had received not $1.2 million but $3.8 million over 26 months, routed through 4 separate sub-accounts, tied at funds the board had never specifically reviewed. The money had not gone to technology infrastructure. It had gone to a personal account co-owned by Tatum Voss and Darcy Prell. A joint account opened 14 months ago in Nevada. There was more. The forged wire transfers that Tatum had shown Willa at the dining table, the ones in her name, had been generated using a digital signature tool that Darcy had access to through her administrative credentials. The metadata on the files showed they had been created 11 days before Tatum slid that folder across the table. They had been building the story before they presented it to her. They had been planning to have her removed before she could ask questions. They had just moved too slowly. On a Thursday evening, 10 days after the board meeting, Willa received a text from Tatum. He was not at home. He had been staying, he claimed, at the firm's corporate apartment downtown, citing work demands. The text said, "We need to talk. Come to the office tomorrow. Bring a lawyer if you want." She brought two. The meeting was supposed to be a negotiation. Tatum arrived with his personal attorney, a man named Clifford Oates, who wore a pocket square and had the practiced ease of someone accustomed to being the most powerful person in the room. Darcy was not there, which told Willa that Tatum still thought this was a conversation he could control by limiting the variables. He slid a document across the conference table. Not a folder this time. A formal separation agreement, pre-printed, with her name already typed in the appropriate lines. "There's a settlement figure on page 6, he said. "It's generous. I think you'll find it fair, given the circumstances." "What circumstances?" Willa asked. Clifford Oates cleared his throat. "There are questions about the initiative's financial management that could become public. This agreement includes a mutual non-disclosure provision that would protect both parties." Willa looked at the settlement figure. It was a number that would have seemed large to someone who didn't know what she now knew about the value of a 49% stake in a $4.3 billion firm. She pushed the document back across the table without opening to page 6. "I won't be signing that," she said. Tatum's face did something complicated. "Willa, the forensic audit is complete," she said. "Ashwell and Cross filed the managing partner suspension notice with the board this morning. Orvin LLC has been flagged for regulatory review. The joint account in Nevada is part of the report." Clifford Oates had gone very still. "The trust my grandfather established gives me 49% equity and operational authority in the event of managing partner misconduct. The board has been notified. They are meeting Monday." She folded her hands on the table. "I don't need a settlement, Tatum. I need you to leave the building." Tatum stood up. His chair scraped back harder than he intended. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand exactly what I'm doing," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. The look of a man who has just realized the ground beneath him is not what he thought it was, and that the person standing across from him has known that longer than he has. Then he looked at Clifford, who gave the almost imperceptible shake of a head that meant there was nothing left to argue. Here they left. Willa sat in the conference room for a few minutes after they were gone. One of her lawyers, a woman named Petra Fenn, who had been taking notes throughout without expression, set down her pen and said simply, "Well done." The board meeting on Monday lasted 4 hours. Willa presented the audit findings with Lyndon Cross and the forensic team. Arlene Dutton asked the right questions, every single one of them, and by the end of the meeting, Tatum's authority had been suspended pending the regulatory investigation, and Willa had been formally recognized as the limited partner's representative with interim oversight authority. She did not celebrate. There was nothing about this that felt like a victory, exactly. It felt more like the moment after a long storm when you walk outside and the air is clean and the damage is visible and you understand that the cleaning up is going to take a while. She went back to the initiative that afternoon. Her staff had heard fragments. Things moved fast in a city this size, but no one said anything directly. They just worked. The program coordinator brought her a coffee without being asked. The grants manager left a stack of foundation renewal forms on her desk with a post-it that said "Ready when you are." These people had kept showing up for the communities they served through 3 years of Tatum pulling the initiative's operating budget lower and lower, redirecting surplus wherever he could. They deserved to know the funding was secured. She told them that afternoon, standing in the middle of the open office, without a formal announcement or a prepared speech, just, "The initiative is fully funded through the next 3 years. The grant restrictions have been lifted. Let's get back to work." There was a pause, and then someone started clapping, and it spread, and Willa stood in the middle of it and felt, for the first time in a very long time, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The regulatory investigation into Orvin LLC moved quickly once the forensic report was submitted. Darcy Prell retained her own attorney and within 2 weeks began cooperating with investigators. The picture that emerged was more calculated than even Willa had realized. Tatum had recruited Darcy's involvement not just for the relationship, though there was that, but because her administrative access gave him a layer of deniability. She could create documents. She could approve vendor payments below a threshold that triggered mandatory review. She could generate signatures. He had told her the money was a performance bonus routed creatively for tax purposes. Whether she had believed that, or whether she had simply chosen not to ask, was a question for the investigators. The forged documents with Willa's name were the part that mattered most to Willa, personally, not because of the legal implications, those were Lyndon's territory, but because of what they revealed about the timeline. Tatum had not panicked and improvised when she started asking questions. He had been building the frame around her for months. He had decided at some point that the cleanest way out was to make her look like the problem. He had looked at 11 years and chosen that. She signed the divorce petition on a Tuesday. It was a single page to start, all the formal language about irreconcilable differences, and she read every word before she signed it because she was done with the habit of trusting that documents were what people said they were. Petra Fenn witnessed it. They shook hands at the door. Walking to her car, Willa passed a florist that had been on that block as long as she could remember, a narrow storefront with buckets of flowers set out on the sidewalk, the kind of place where the owner knows the names of half the neighborhood. She stopped. She bought a bunch of yellow ranunculus, just because. She drove back to the initiative with them on the passenger seat, and she put them in a vase on the front desk, and she went back to work. 6 months later, the board voted to formalize Willa's operational role at Voss Meridian Capital, restructured under a new name with a new managing partner hired through an independent search. Willa did not take the COO title. She remained limited partner representative and kept her position directing the initiative, which had by then expanded its program coverage to 2 additional counties and hired 6 new staff. She had negotiated a dedicated foundation arm within the capital structure, fully funded, fully independent, specifically to support community health access in underserved areas. Her grandfather would have appreciated that, she thought. He had always said, the point of money was what you built with it. She was at her desk late one evening when Lyndon Cross called. He had something to tell her, he said. When they had reviewed Orland Creswick's original trust documents preparing for the board restructuring, they had found a letter, handwritten, sealed separately, intended for Willa. It had been held by the firm with instructions to deliver it when the trust became active. Lyndon read it to her over the phone. It was not long. Her grandfather wrote in the direct, unadorned way of a man who didn't see the point in ornament. He told her he was sorry he hadn't been able to explain everything while he was alive. He told her he had watched her build the initiative from a one-room office with a second-hand desk, and that he was prouder of that than of anything he had built himself. He told her he had put the trust together, not because he didn't believe in Tatum, but because he believed in her. And he had wanted to make sure that whatever happened, she would always have solid ground to stand on. He had signed it with a line she had seen on every birthday card he ever sent her. Don't let them talk you small. You never were. She sat at her desk for a while after Lyndon hung up. The office was quiet. The yellow ranunculus on the front desk had long since been replaced. She bought a new bunch every Tuesday now, a habit she hadn't planned but hadn't stopped either. Through the glass partition, she could see the evening cleaning crew moving through the hallway, and the familiar flicker of the overhead light that facilities had been promising to fix for 3 months, and her own reflection in the dark window, coffee-stained cardigan and a legal pad and all. She thought about the dining room table, the folder sliding across it, the moment she had stood under that chandelier and understood that something was ending and had not yet seen the shape of what was beginning. She had been afraid in that room. She just hadn't let it show. She turned back to her desk, picked up her pen, and kept working.